Since I was a child, I learned that love isn't divided, it's given. And apparently, in our house, it was given entirely to my brother. I grew up in a beautiful home. Trimmed lawn, clean windows, perfectly aligned portraits on the staircase wall. On the outside, we looked like the perfect family. My father was a doctor, my mother, a teacher, and then there was him, Daniel, my brother, 2 years older, the pride of the house. Daniel had everything: medals, awards, attention. And me? I had silence. Silence at breakfast when my grades were good, but not as good as his. Silence at Christmas, when he received expensive gifts and I got practical things. Silence even on my 10th birthday, when he stole the spotlight by getting accepted onto the school's main soccer team. People applauded him. I just cut my cake alone. But it wasn't envy. It was absence. It was like I was invisible. My mom used to say I was the quiet one, the mature one, the one who didn't cause trouble. And maybe that's why they didn't look at me. Because I figured things out on my own. Opened my own notebooks. Cleaned my own scrapes. Found my own way alone. While Daniel grew under the spotlight, I grew in the shadows. He was the first in the family to attend a top-tier university, aerospace engineering. My dad cried the day the acceptance letter arrived. He actually cried. I had never seen that before. When it was my turn, I chose psychology. There were no tears, no celebration, no special dinner, just silence. The same silence as always. During college, I watched my brother be called to events, honored, interviewed. Every visit home was a list of his achievements. Daniel is working with NASA. Daniel got promoted. And me? I worked at a community center, helped children with trauma. I listened to stories of pain, abandonment, and silence. Stories that somehow felt like mine. But there was a moment that changed everything. It was autumn. Dry leaves covered the front yard. My mother called me, crying. Daniel had disappeared. No one knew where he was. He had quit his job, left everything behind. No note, no explanation. 3 weeks of silence, the same kind I knew so well. When they finally found him, he was in a clinic, diagnosed with severe depression. Shock, shame, confusion. No one understood. Daniel, the brilliant one, the successful one, in ruins. That's when they called me. You're a psychologist. Maybe you can help, my father said, looking at me, for the first time, as someone who mattered. I walked into the white room at the clinic. Daniel was there, hair uncut, eyes sunken, pale skin. He saw me and started crying. No words, just tears. I sat beside him. I waited. The silence didn't hurt now. It was the same one I had carried my whole life. But in that moment, it was a bridge. After a while, he spoke. His voice was weak, guilty. He said he always knew about the difference, about the weight they placed on him, that while he looked like he had everything, he lived terrified of failing. He said he admired my silent strength, but never had the courage to say it. He asked me for forgiveness. And I cried too. For the first time, I felt seen. Months passed. Daniel began to rebuild. He left his career, decided to study literature, something he had always loved but never had permission to pursue. My parents? They began to change. Slowly, they asked about my work, came to my lectures. They listened. But most importantly, they started hearing the silence too. Today, Daniel is a writer. I run a mental health nonprofit. We work together on social projects. Our bond, once built on imbalance, is now grounded in empathy. For a long time, I thought I got the worst end. Then my brother got everything, and I got nothing. But I've learned that silence is not absence. Sometimes it's fertile ground, a place of resistance, a space for self-discovery. Daniel gained the world, but in the silence, I found my voice. And today, at last, it's being heard. Epilogue, the voice silence held. In the months that followed, the house I grew up in, the same one where my achievements went unnoticed, began to change its sound. Not overnight. Silence still lingered. But now it had company. I remember a Saturday afternoon. All 4 of us in the kitchen. My dad washing dishes, something unheard of while my mom baked a cake. Daniel sat at the table, reading one of his short stories aloud. He wrote about invisible people, about forgotten sons, about silent screams echoing in perfect homes. He never said it, but I knew. they were our stories. When he finished, there was silence. But this time, it was a different silence. Not absence. Presence. Respect. My parents clapped. My mom teared up quietly. My father placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder and said something I had waited years to hear. You are more than our expectations. And then, to my surprise, he turned to me. And you've always been our anchor. I'm sorry we didn't see it before. At that moment, the silence I had carried for years shattered inside me like glass under pressure. I didn't cry from pain. I cried from release. That's when I understood something essential. Silence isn't the enemy. The real enemy is not being heard. I began writing, too. Not stories of heroes or epic tragedies, but stories like mine, like yours, like those of so many who lived in the margins of affection, of validation, of attention. Stories of children who weren't first in line, but carried the weight of the world while everyone watched the stage. Stories of those who survived neglect and turned absence into strength. In time, we created a project called What Was Never Said, a series of workshops and group circles for families who, like ours, learned to love unequally. We started in a small room with 10 chairs. Today, we bring that conversation to schools, companies, entire communities. Daniel talks about expectations. I talk about silence. And at the end of each gathering, we ask the same question. What inside you has never been said? The answers hurt, but they heal, because finally they are heard. Today, if you walk into our home, you'll see an old photo on the staircase wall. Daniel in a suit, receiving an award. Next to it, a new frame was recently added, a photo of me, surrounded by children, holding a sign that reads, "Listening is also love." When I look at that photo, I think about everything I was. The silent boy, the invisible teenager, the man who learned to listen even when no one listened to him. And I think of you who are hearing this story now. Maybe you're like me, the forgotten brother, the overlooked daughter, the student who was never the favorite. Maybe you grew up in silence. But let me tell you something. Your silence carries weight, memory, a voice. Maybe the world never applauded you yet, but your existence has meaning, even if no one ever told you before. Because sometimes it's in silence that the deepest courage lives. And when that courage finally speaks, the world must stop to listen. Chapter: The Letters Behind the Wall. Some months after Daniel's recovery, our project, What Was Never Said, began to attract attention. Newspapers started calling. Podcasts, TV shows. The story of two brothers, one who had it all and one who was forgotten, had touched a nerve in people. Suddenly, we weren't just voices in our own living room. We were voices for thousands. But with recognition comes exposure. One day, a journalist requested an interview with my parents. I hesitated. The idea of seeing them tell our story publicly, after years of silence, felt like reopening an old wound that was just beginning to heal. But they agreed. And when the interview aired, it was surreal. My father, usually firm and reserved, broke into tears on camera. He admitted he had failed to see me. He said, "I thought I was building strong children, but I was only building expectations." My mother said something that stayed with me forever. We loved them both, but we loved one out loud, and the other in silence. We thought he didn't need it, but every child needs to be seen. I watched that interview alone in my apartment, and for the first time, I cried, not for pain, not for rage, but because finally they understood, or at least I thought they did. A week later, I returned to the house. I hadn't visited alone since Daniel's breakdown. The living room was the same. The smell of old wood, cinnamon, and distant memories. But something felt different, as if the air had questions to ask. While cleaning out old drawers in the attic, I found a small box. Wooden, dusty, wrapped in an old red ribbon. Inside there were letters, dozens of them, addressed to me, from my mother. I froze. Some dated back to my childhood. Handwritten, folded with care. They were unsent, hidden. The first one read, "Dear Lucas, I saw the way you looked at me when I hugged your brother at his graduation. I wanted to hug you too, but I didn't know how to explain that I was proud of you without a medal in your hand. You've always been so quiet, so independent. I thought you didn't need the same things Daniel did. But I think I was wrong. Another one. I watched you clean your scraped knee in the bathroom. You were only 8. I stood outside the door listening, wanting to enter, but I was afraid I'd interrupt your strength. I thought I was respecting your silence. I didn't realize I was abandoning you in it. Each letter, a wound reopening. Each one, a balm I had never received. There were over 40 letters, some stained with tears, some unfinished, all of them unsent. And in that moment, I understood a terrifying truth. Maybe I was never unloved, just unheard. It broke me, because for years, I built an identity around being the forgotten one, around surviving without their affection, around the absence. But now, everything I thought I knew about my past was being rewritten. And yet, wasn't that worse? To know they felt something, but still said nothing? Why didn't she send them? Why did I have to bleed in silence while she bled quietly behind closed doors? I took the box downstairs. I didn't say a word, just placed it on the kitchen table. My mother turned pale. My father went silent. I wasn't supposed to find these, was I? Tears welled up in her eyes. She whispered. I wrote them because I couldn't speak. Your silence made me think you were strong. I didn't want to make you weaker by reminding you that you weren't seen. Daniel entered the room quietly. He looked at the letters, then at me. He said something I'll never forget. We all lived in silence. Lucas, yours was ignored. Hers was locked in drawers. Mine was behind applause. That night, for the first time, we sat as a family and read the letters aloud. Some made us cry. Others made us laugh. But all of them made us whole. And I realized silence isn't just something we endure. It's something we pass down until someone decides to break it. And that person was me. Chapter: The Voices That Silence Buried. After reading the letters, something shifted inside me. For years, I walked through life convinced I was ignored. Now, I had to learn to live with another truth. I was loved, but in an imperfect, wounded, and silent way. And somehow, that hurt even more. It's easier to cope with rejection than with love that never learned how to express itself. News of our story spread. A small documentary was made, and the first screening happened at a modest festival in a quiet town. I almost didn't go. I was afraid. Afraid of exposure. Afraid I wasn't ready. Afraid of finally being heard. But I went. In the audience, sitting beside me, was an older man with silver hair and tired eyes. During the film, he didn't cry. But at the end, he came up to me and said, I never told my son I was proud of him. He's 43 now. Lives far away. I think it's too late. I looked at him and replied, It's not too late. It will only be too late when you stop trying. That night, more than 100 people came to speak to me. Parents who had never said, I love you. Children who had never heard, You matter. Siblings who had vanished inside their own homes. It was as if our story had torn a veil, allowing thousands of silent voices to cry out for the first time. And that's when the idea came. Daniel and I decided to organize something bigger, a national event. A conference called Families and the Silence Between Words. It sounded insane. But in less than a month, we had support, infrastructure, and over 2,000 signups. On the day of the event, I stood backstage with trembling hands. When I looked out into the crowd, I didn't see strangers. I saw mirrors, faces carrying the same invisible pain I had once buried. I began my speech by telling them about the box of letters, how my mother had tried to love me in secret, thinking it wouldn't harm me, how my father believed strength was built in silence, and how my brother, even with all the praise, lived in desperate silence too. Then I asked, how many of you heard I love you too late? How many grew up believing you had to earn love instead of simply receiving it? Silence. But it wasn't empty. It was heavy, alive, full of stories about to explode. At the end of the talk, we opened a live mic. A teenage girl was the first to step forward. She was shaking. My dad never hugged me. But last night, after watching the documentary, he tried. It was weird, but I let him. And it was the best weird moment of my life. Next came a man in his 60s. I lost my brother in an accident. He was the favorite. I envied him my whole life. I never told him I loved him. Today, I'd give anything for one last conversation. The line grew. Stories wove into each other. The auditorium became a home where love finally didn't have to be earned, only spoken. Later that evening, something stopped me in my tracks. A letter arrived. No sender. Inside was a single piece of paper, handwritten. You are not just the voice of the forgotten. You are the hope of those still learning how to love. Thank you for saying what I never could to my son. And in that moment, I understood something beyond words. The pain I lived through wasn't in vain. My silence became a bridge. My story became healing. Final chapter. The day my father cried for me. Months after the conference, my mother invited me for dinner. She said my father wanted to talk to me. I went with no expectations. Part of me still carried the old armor of distrust, as if I might once again become invisible. But when I arrived, I found my father in the backyard, staring at the stars. He handed me a small voice recorder. Listen to this when you're alone. That night, I lay in bed and pressed play. It was his voice. Shaky. Slow. Lucas, I failed you. Not because I didn't love you, but because I didn't know how to love you the way you needed. I grew up believing that love meant preparing, teaching, correcting, but you needed something else. You needed presence, and I wasn't there. If today you are a man who inspires so many people, it's in spite of me. But I wish it could also be because of me. I'm sorry, son. I love you. I always did. I cried for hours. That tough, cold man, made of rules and routines, had finally taken off his armor. The next day, I found him again in the backyard. I said nothing. I just hugged him. Long, strong, silent. But this time, it was a silence full of everything.